I'm David Findlay and I'm a solicitor with the Crofting Commission. I provide the Crofting Commission with legal advice. I also represent the Commission in appeals before the Scottish Land Court. And I provide the Commission with a whole range of advice, not just crofting law, but also relating to areas such as data protection, freedom of information, and general public and administrative law. I'm here talking today about deemed crofts, or so-called deemed crofts. Essentially what deemed crofts are grazing rights or apportionments that have become separated from the croft. A deemed croft is usually created when somebody buys their croft. The grazing right or apportionment is part of the croft tenancy. So when a crofter exercises the right to buy, the grazing right or apportionment are left, as it were, to one side and become a separate legal entity. So at that point, the two are separated. There are some other ways that deemed crofts can be created. For instance, if I as a crofter assign my grazing right to you, but retain the croft for myself, then the croft tenancy and the deemed croft will then become separate entities. It's important when purchasing a croft, whether that's a tenanted croft or an owner-occupied croft, to check a number of sources to see if the grazing right or apportionment is formally attached to the croft or whether it's one of these deemed crofts. The way that you do this, first of all, is to check the Register of Crofts. The Register of Crofts is held by the Crofting Commission and is its database of information about crofts. The Register of Crofts will let you know whether the grazing right or apportionment is associated with the croft. The second source of information that you can check is the Crofting Register, which is administered by the Keeper of the Registers of Scotland. It is a map-based register, but it also contains information about grazing rights and whether or not they are associated with a croft. The third source of information is your solicitor. You'd ask him or her to check the title deed if you're purchasing ownership of a croft and to see whether or not the title deed includes any grazing right or apportionment that you think is associated with the croft. So generally there's no definitive way of finding out whether there is an associated deemed croft, but by a process of elimination and by checking what it is that you are hoping to buy, then you can see whether or not what you're buying has got a grazing right or not. I mean, deemed crofts are not really crofts in the real sense of the word. They're grazing rights or apportionments that have become separated from the croft. But they can be passed on in much the same way as a croft. So you can assign a grazing right or apportionment to somebody else, or on death your executor can transfer the grazing right or apportionment to a beneficiary in much the same way as you can do with a croft. If you transfer a deemed croft, whether that's a lifetime transfer or a transfer on death, then generally it needs to be registered in the Crofting Register in much the same way that a transfer of a croft itself has to be registered. It's possible for anybody who holds a deemed croft that comprises a grazing right to apply to the Commission for that right to be apportioned in full or in part. Because a deemed croft is essentially just a grazing right, albeit one that's no longer connected to a particular croft, it means that as a shareholder in the common grazings, you can apply, like any other shareholder, to apportion your grazing right. Usually that won't be a full apportionment, but in some cases it could be that you convert all of your grazing rights into an apportionment. Unfortunately, once a grazing share or apportionment is separated from the croft, it is quite difficult to bring them back together. There are a number of rather convoluted ways that you can bring the grazing right and a croft back together. One of them would be to let the croft as an enlargement, the grazing share as an enlargement to the letting of a croft. However, that requires you to create a new croft tenancy, and it also requires the grazing right or apportionment to be also to be let at the same time as an enlargement to the existing croft. That would have the effect of bringing the two together, but it's a scenario that doesn't happen very much in real life. It is really important for anybody who is purchasing a croft to be aware of exactly what it is they are buying. So if you understand that you're buying grazing rights, or if you understand that you're buying a hill apportionment that used to be in the common grazings, you really need to check whether or not the grazing right and apportionment is included in the title if it's ownership you're buying, or in the tenancy if it's the assignation of a croft tenancy. So from the Commission's point of view, we would say to buyers, be very much aware of what it is that you are buying, and make whatever inquiries you need to, whether with the Commission, the Crofting Register, or with your solicitor, to make sure that you understand exactly what it is you are buying.